Hey folks, Michael Ayala here with Legal View. I wanted to check in with you right now and get you an update on that Karmelo Anthony hearing that's going on in Collin County, Texas. It's that motion for a new trial. They're arguing it today. I wanted to get you the information. They're not quite done for the day, but they're going to be wrapping up. My understanding is they will be back tomorrow. And as I've told you guys before, the time frame is short for this. They appointed a new judge to this case. And this judge has to get up to speed on the original record of the case and all of the filings now for this motion for a new trial before he makes a ruling. That ruling has to happen by Monday the 24th by statute. In Texas, you get 75 days from when the sentence is handed down, and that 75th day is actually the 23rd on Sunday. But of course, you get that working day into Monday. So he's got a rough weekend ahead of him. He's going to make any rulings on these at all. He could very well not make any rulings at all. If he doesn't do that, then all of the issues raised in this particular motion for a new trial will then be pushed on up for jurisdiction on the appeals level. So technically, he could do nothing and it wouldn't really affect much at all. Quickly, just want to remind folks, if you're just joining me, not really up to speed, Karmelo Anthony is a young man at the age of 17, stabbed another young man, Austin Metcalf, of the same age. Karmelo Anthony is black. Austin Metcalf is white. It just really sent Frisco, Texas crazy. That's where it happened. They were at a track meet. There was a confrontation, and Karmelo Anthony did stab him. He was going to claim self-defense, and in fact, he did claim self-defense, but never took the stand at the trial because of a gentleman's agreement. That's one of the issues today that I'll get into in just a little bit. And the other issues being discussed in this motion for a new trial include the fact that he was denied a public trial as guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment of the United States. They got into a lot of that stuff in the hearing. I'm going to try to sum that up very, very quickly because if I went through all that was talked about as far as that, I won't have a lot of time to go into the gentleman's agreement and all the things that I think are really important here as to what was going to come out if they didn't try this case under a gentleman's agreement. What did they have on the backgrounds of Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf? Really interesting stuff. So you're going to definitely want to stick around for that. But quickly, as far as the public trial is concerned, it's very simple. The defense is claiming that by denying him a public trial, you denied a constitutional right. That is a structural issue. If an appeals court decides, or this court decides, that denying him a public trial did in fact happen, there are no other inquiries. A new trial has to be ordered because it's a constitutional right that's being denied. Under normal circumstances, if there's an evidentiary ruling or something along that line or jury instruction ruling, then there's a secondary consideration as to whether it affected the outcome of the trial. That's not the case with this one. If they decide that he was denied a public trial, it's immediately remanded for a new trial. Basically, the judge and Bill Worski came up with a plan to keep this trial under wraps and away from the public because they were worried about safety. There was a tremendous amount of public interest in the case. There were a lot of bomb threats, actually. First witness to take the stand for the defense was the public information officer, who was asked to testify about some of the reasons that they decided not to have an overflow room, for instance, because what the defense is essentially arguing is that there weren't enough seats, that they gave too many seats to the media. There weren't enough seats for the public. And there were a number of affidavits about people who traveled from far away, were standing outside on line, were denied opportunity to get into the courtroom. And this overflow room was available for the jury selection, but was not available for the trial. And what came out was essentially closed circuit wasn't available in this other courtroom that they were going to use. And the baseline issue was, in fact, keeping everybody safe. There was some issue made in the motion for a new trial that Karmelo Anthony wasn't at a lot of the proceedings. And Bill Worski said that the agreement was that they wouldn't do it because they wanted to keep him safe as well. So underage witnesses, the people involved in the trial, the prosecutor, the defense, everybody was aware that the idea was to keep everyone safe. And Russell Wilson made sure to point out that none of these things were put on the record. According to the law in Texas, the way it's written and the way I saw it in the motion for a new trial, it says that two things. One, anything that you do must be put on the record. Any reasons that you restrict the public nature of a trial should be put on the record. And it should be the least restrictive mode. So none of that was put on the record, and Russell Wilson was making those points throughout. So that kind of sums it up. Not sure where that's going to land. That one is a bit odd for me, not one that I'm tremendously familiar with. But I want to move on to the stuff that I think is really important, and that has to do with this gentleman's agreement. I do want to say Toby Shook and Mike Howard were in the courtroom. Toby Shook, again, is a former law partner of Bill Werschke, who was the prosecutor in this case. Mike Howard did, in fact, take the stand. And when asked how this gentleman's agreement came about, he said he wasn't sure. He didn't remember. Bill Werschke did say that it was between him and it started off between him and Toby Shook. And again, Toby Shook is his buddy, and that everybody was in an agreement with it. And that's the way they were going to do it, both in terms of the decisions as regarding the safety and keeping things out of the public eye and this whole gentleman's agreement. And Mike Howard doesn't dispute that. It was the understanding of the agreement that became an issue. Now, the agreement was made because the prosecutor went to Toby Shook and said, we want to keep this a clean trial, only of what happened under the tent. Once you get a load of the information that they had on Austin Metcalf and his brother Hunter, you can understand why the prosecutor was interested in that. There was a lot of bad information. I do want to preface by what I'm going to go through here that it wasn't 100% certain all of this would be allowed in, because there are rules of evidence and there are restrictions as to what evidence you can bring in against the victim of a crime, even when someone's claiming self-defense. But something very interesting came out during this hearing that I think would have made a big difference as to what would have been allowed in at this trial. But let me get into some of the things that were in play as far as information that would have come out regarding both Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf and his brother Hunter. I'll start with Austin and Hunter, because that's kind of the way it played out in the courtroom and the way I took my notes. And I want to tell everyone I got these notes based on three different sources. Three different news stations in Dallas were covering this, were in the courtroom, and either blogging out notes, tweeting out notes. So I cross-referenced these things, and I'm repeating to you what was in those notes. So these aren't firsthand. I did not hear these. There is no public coverage of these hearings either. So I'm giving you what I'm getting from the courtroom. So the defense attorney, again, the public information officer was the first witness talking about the safety situation, the closed circuit situation, the non-public nature of the trial, and some of the decisions made there. Second witness was what we're getting into now. That was Mike Howard. Remember, he was the attorney who represented Karmelo Anthony. He talked about meeting the family and ended up representing them. And he talks about some of the information that was going to come out, or possibly come out. I don't want to say it that way because we don't know what would have been allowed in. But let me start off statements that were attributed that he had. This is the information he had that he planned to use against the victims in this case and his brother Hunter, if he in fact testified. They included a report about a graffiti incident involving the N-word, anti-Semitic language as well. Austin and Hunter got 12 months probation as a result of this. They would have tried to show body cam where Austin and Hunter agreed that they did do, quote unquote, some dumb stuff. This was their words, that they were responsible for the graffiti. There were text messages found on their phone that they used derogatory slang for Hispanic people. Text messages from Hunter allegedly discussing confronting members of the Independence High School track team at a previous meet. Included in those texts included, hey, let's jump them. Text messages regarding another confrontation at a track meet where Hunter says he was going to kill that MF about some kids from Independence High School. There were messages negatively referring to other track students from Independence High School. I had some issues with Independence High School. That's not where Karmelo went. Oh, that's where Karmelo went. Austin also reportedly used the N-word in a conversation with his brother about Edwin Parra. We all know Edwin Parra. He was the friend, or the quote-unquote friend, of Karmelo Anthony, who apparently called him under the tent, under the Memorial High School tent. He used the N-word in Snapchat, in a group chat, the day before the stabbing. Hunter was reportedly banned from a teacher's classroom the day before the stabbing. Records from 2023, this happened in 2025, showed Austin bullied another black student, but he wasn't disciplined that time. In March of 2025, he was ordered to stay away from a different black student. He was accused of bullying. Both Austin and Hunter were accused of threatening to hit cheerleaders. There was a report of an assault on a female student in 2024. When the twins were 10 years old, they were accused of frequently targeting a female classmate. That classmate ended up with a shoulder trauma after Hunter allegedly pushed her. Austin and Hunter were reportedly kicked out of a football game for wanting to beat up kids, saying that they were talking crazy. Now, talking crazy is an important point here, because that was the phrase that was allegedly used under the tent about Karmelo Anthony, that he had been talking crazy. So that's important. So again, these are all things that under the gentleman's agreement brought up by Bill Werschke, they agreed not to go into it all, not to cross-examine witnesses about any of this, to keep this out of the trial, to keep a clean trial. So Howard said, under direct examination by Russell Wilson, the appeals attorney for Karmelo Anthony, that the text messages and their actions painted the picture of students who really had an issue. Black students seemed to have an issue with girls and basically had an overall racist outlook. There was more. I'll go on. There was even a video of Austin's phone that showed him throwing a water bottle at a black student and hitting him in the face. You're making videos of yourself doing these things. Mike Howard testified that it could be just messing around, but the context of all the other incidents, it shows something a little different, a general aggression and demeaning acts towards black people. This is Mike Howard's words on the stand. Howard said the history of the twin brothers acting in concert with each other was relevant to what Anthony would have felt in that moment. So he would have argued that in any arguments trying to get this in front of a jury. And again, no guarantee it would have ended up there. There is a section in Texas law that when there's an issue as to who the aggressor was in an incident, a lot of this information would have been allowed in. According to the motion, Mike Howard's affidavit with the motion for a new trial, he told Bill Werschke, look, a lot of this can come in. Bill Werschke said, no way, because we know who the aggressor is. This is, again, according to Mike Howard's affidavit. We know who the aggressor is. It was Austin Metcalf. So there's that. All right, there's more. I'll give you more. According to the attorneys, Austin was made to go to a church group about being consumed by anger and addiction and lust in December of 2024. Howard said that there was potential evidentiary items to contradict testimony that Austin was calm during the encounter with Karmelo and that Austin had a history of wanting to fight. Now, I can tell you, in the motion for a new trial, it's mentioned by Russell Wilson that Austin Metcalf, one of the guys who witnessed this, gave a statement to police that this was the norm for Austin Metcalf. He said he had seen this type of thing many, many times before. There's more evidence presented to the judge that included messages from another football player saying that Austin and Hunter needed to control their emotions, and Austin responded with an obscene sexual remark. There was a video from 2022. It was presented to the judge, taken from Austin's phone, showing him laughing at and filming a black student who told him to stop. Austin then hit that kid in the face. It's another incident. Another video taken from Austin's phone in 2023, showing that Austin was hitting a student sitting next to him in class in the back of the head. So all this, it shows Austin was a bully. He liked to fight. He had anger issues, lust issues. Other videos from Austin's phone showed him fighting another kid while wearing boxing gloves and bare fist fighting someone in his room while another person counted down. The defense had another video from Austin's phone taken in January of 2023. It showed Austin cheering on his friend as he tackled and chased a black boy around a house and called him racist names. A separate video showed Austin choking another kid in the weight room. Other character trait evidence presented to the judge showed Austin using racial slurs and holding a butterfly knife while swearing at another student and telling him to come blank or F with me now. And here's the key to the whole thing. I mean, if all these incidents weren't enough, to tell you what we all assumed was the situation with Austin and Hunter, Mike Howard said on the stand, now everything I said to you is what Mike Howard testified to, he was going to present or try to present as evidence against Austin Metcalf. Howard said that Karmelo Anthony once saw Austin and Hunter get into a fight with a kid at a basketball game and could describe knowing that at least one of the Metcalf twins was aggressive and prone to starting fights. He said this showed that Anthony went under the tent knowing that the twins had been aggressive in the past. This is huge. Because when you start talking about this type of evidence coming in against the victim, one of the key tests is it relevant? And a lot of it wouldn't have been relevant if Karmelo Anthony had no idea about it. So that would have made it more difficult to get a lot of this information in. But if there was information that Karmelo Anthony knew that these guys were aggressive, had actually seen them be aggressive, then it has a higher probability of being allowed in at trial. So this is bombshell type stuff. It also raises the question as to why a defense attorney would agree to a gentleman's agreement that would have precluded all of this stuff, or even precluded the opportunity to get this stuff in front of a jury. I don't understand it. Well, I had said back when the trial was going on, back when we first found out about this gentleman's agreement, I had said, we have to wait and see what the prosecution had against Karmelo to understand the decision made by the defense to agree to this gentleman's agreement. So we're finding out more about what the prosecution had, and that's what we'll get into now. As far as Karmelo's decision not to testify, Werschke said Karmelo was originally going to testify and then backed out. And we know this, right? We knew that happened. Here's what he said about that. He said it would have been the cherry on top for the prosecution. I don't know why he didn't testify. I wish he had. Then he goes on. He has an explanation based on the information that he had against Karmelo Anthony as to why Karmelo Anthony brought the knife to the track meet. This is important because this was the question. I think if we all came away with one question as from that trial, it was, why did Karmelo Anthony have a knife? This is Bill Werschke's explanation, how he was going to frame the evidence in the case had it been allowed in, or had this gentleman agreement not been struck. Why did Anthony bring a knife to the track meet, Werschke said? He explained that on the morning of the stabbing, Anthony's ex-girlfriend went to an assistant principal at their school and reported that Anthony had been stalking her. Worski talked about some text messages found on Anthony's phone. Among them, Anthony sent a picture of the knife that was used in this case and told his ex-girlfriend, "I'm low-key on the verge." So that's a nasty threat. That's a nasty threat. He's a 17-year-old boy. According to Bill Worski, he's breaking up with his girl. She says he's stalking him. It was bad enough, whatever was going on. I don't know specifically what was going on, but it was bad enough for her to go to the school and say, "He's stalking me." Worski went on to say that what he had on Anthony was a documented pattern of an obsession with knives and fighting. He had a juvenile history of not keeping his hands to himself. Now, Howard said that the state believed the narrative that there had been a big breakup and that Anthony was stalking or acting aggressively toward her was relevant, but he said he had a little different story to tell. Girlfriend reportedly told the defense that there were some additional text messages sent after Anthony's cell phone died. Messages synced to his laptop showed there had not been a catastrophic fight or breakup. So again, if the prosecution would have brought that evidence in, this is what Mike Howard says he would have brought in to combat the idea that Karmelo Anthony was freaking out that day and brought the knife because he was mad at the world. He's breaking up with his girlfriend. And that's what put him in a position where he wanted to hurt someone. The messages that were on the laptop that were synced to his phone show that they were actually still dating on the morning of the stabbing. The girlfriend was planning to testify, but because of that gentleman's agreement, Howard said he could not get into that. He also said the state's theory that Anthony showed up at the track meet in an agitated state of mind because he had broken up and on the verge of committing violence was clearly going to be rebutted by this evidence. So clearly it would have been something for the jury to consider. But he had his evidence, which contradicted some of the things that the state was going to bring in against Karmelo Anthony. Now, that's not a good look. I'm not going to say he's not the first 17-year-old boy who would have freaked out over breaking up with a girl. I'm not going to say Austin Metcalf was the first 17-year-old boy to be a bully or not like black people or not like Jews or whatever. Again, 17-year-old boys are still kind of figuring things out. When we talk about evidence in the case, I'm still confused as to why the defense would make an agreement, because I think based on what I'm seeing, he had an advantage. But again, we have to remember, still a gamble at this point, because he doesn't know what's going to be allowed in. And, the person who's in the arena should get the benefit of the doubt because he knows the judge, Judge John Roach. And there had been a number of conversations, off-the-record conversations, because that's the way the judge and the prosecutor wanted this to go. And he might have gotten a feel for how this thing was going to go and thought this gentleman's agreement might have been a good idea. When we talk about this gentleman's agreement, that's where the issue as far as an appeals issue comes into play. Because again, appeals courts don't like to second guess strategic decisions by attorneys. They will look at the law. They will look if mistakes were made legally. So for instance, if the judge had denied, let's say they went ahead with their motions, the judge denied all that stuff about Austin Metcalf. The appeals court would look at that and say, were they correct in doing that? They'll look at all the circumstances surrounding it. They'll say, oh, Karmelo Anthony knew that there was some violence. He was going to testify to that. So not allowing it in was problematic. That was an error. Then they would take a look at the error and say, was it harmless or did it affect the outcome of the trial? But that's not the case here. There was a gentleman's agreement. That agreement was a strategic decision by the defense. Knowing the totality of the circumstances at the time, they're not going to go back and look at that. That's not what appeals courts do. So while it may have affected the ability to get a fair trial, and many of us who look at this don't like it, because we all know gentlemen's agreements are done all the time. But when they affect a constitutional right of someone. So if Bill Worski knows that that agreement was going to stop Carmelo Anthony from testifying, there's no way that there's a gentleman agreement on something as important as a constitutional right to testify. No. So again, it raises questions that you have to ask. Mike Howard also testified to this whole thing about, and something the defense really honed in on was what they call a shadow docket. I've talked many times about when you're trying cases, there's a process where it goes through the public docket. So people get access to filings and they kind of get a sense of where the case is going, what the defense is arguing, what the evidence is in the case. It's all part of what's called a public trial. This is so things don't happen in the dark. That's why this constitutional right exists. And Mike Howard said this was old school. This was old school. And the judge went about this in an old school way with the off the record meetings in the room and in his chambers and not allowing the papers to go through, everything to go through his office. No one could see what was going on. Now, I can tell you when Black people hear old school, they think corrupt. There's no reason that you go old school except to be corrupt. Here's the other thing that I found out from following reports out of Texas. One of the reporters out there said they talked to a number of attorneys, and they said, now this hasn't been verified, but they said there's an informal agreement, a gentleman's agreement, if you will, between the judges that no one's going to allow cameras in the courtroom. Again, a backroom agreement made by the powers that be to not have cameras in the courtroom. The problem with that is that the legislature of Texas, the people of Texas, decided that cameras are okay. There's a law in the book saying cameras are okay. And if you're not going to have them, you got to state the reasons on the record. But they just have an informal agreement. And there's an old saying, remember a mentor of mine told me, people make the rules, or the people who make the rules make them so that other people can't break them. They know what they are and they can break them, but other people can't. So you got these rules, and these judges have no problem. If this little gentleman's agreement about not having cameras in the courtroom, that's what this is about. Who are the judges to decide if the legislature says that cameras are something that this state wants and needs? These judges decided, no, not us. That's not what we want, regardless. And it's very easy to come up with reasons why you're going to deny it. In this case, it was the safety. And these are not terrible reasons. But according to the motion for a new trial, the statute says it also has to be the least restrictive way of denying the public access to the trial. And the reasons have to be put on the record. I don't think either one of those are done to satisfy Carmelo Anthony's Sixth Amendment right to a public trial. But again, that'll be up to the appeals court to decide. The cross-examination the direct examination of Mike Howard continued by Russell Wilson. And he asked him, he said, these specific witnesses, the specific information you could have used to cross-examine some or all of the witnesses on this information, or brought in your own witnesses to bring some of this information out. He said, yes. And he said, Austin can absolutely be very aggressive at times and has a very vulgar mouth. There were statements made to police as well. It's something he would have gone into, but for the agreement. I'm not sure what you want to make of that and what that all means. And the most important thing is what it means to the judge hearing these arguments and listening to this testimony, what it'll mean to the appeals court, if and when they get the opportunity to hear these arguments. But the pictures are becoming clearer. Pictures are becoming clearer. And if Bill Worski, a couple of times today, the prosecutor in the case, tried to shape his arguments as protecting Carmelo Anthony by going and trying to do this gentleman's agreement to keep a clean trial and only keep it to what happened under the tent. He said that was about protecting Carmelo Anthony. But as you hear this information, extensive information, there was no guarantee. It was a gamble for him too, as to whether all this information would come in. And I don't know if it was that magnanimous. I'm thinking he was interested in winning this case, and he knew his chances of winning were better if he could keep all that stuff about Hunter and his brother out of the trial. And then if in his mind he could keep it out of the trial and keep Carmelo Anthony from testifying, which is what he said he believed the deal to be, that's a deal I take all day long. Now, if Mike Howard had known early on, if that was made clear, put on the record that this deal included Carmelo Anthony not testifying, I don't know what the ultimate choice would have been. But if you have full disclosure, then you feel better about the choice. Mike Howard says he wasn't aware of what was going on. And so that's what caused the problem at trial. So again, it's hard to fault him for making the decision he made. And it's easy to look back in hindsight and say it wasn't the right one. But boy, as the table gets full of all this information, it makes you wonder. And I'm wondering if it would have been better just to let this thing play out. Based on the jury in this case, not sure it would have made a tremendous difference. Not sure it would have made a tremendous difference. A young black boy with an obsession with guns, knives, which is what Prosecutor Bilwerski said he would have argued, and what the social media of Carmelo Anthony showed. He seemed to have some obsession with that. And of course, his records show that he liked to fight or got into confrontations. You put that in front of a jury, all white, mixed ethnicities, but no black people. I'm not sure how that goes over. Versus, let's say, all the information about Hunter and Austin come in, and Hunter decides to testify as well. I'm not sure how that all ends up playing out. So, you just have to look at it and say, man, I just wish it would have been, just a complete and fair trial all the way around. Let the chips fall where they may. Again, I don't know if the decision would have been to make Carmelo Anthony testify or not. And I'm not sure, at least under that gentleman's agreement aspect, it's going to be enough for an appeals court for the reasons that I've stated earlier. All right. So my understanding is what I saw earlier was that the defense plans to call some 40 witnesses or something. Let me take a look here. Right in front of me. Was it 40 witnesses they plan to call? No, 12 witnesses. I'm sorry. So they plan to call 12 witnesses. I believe only 2 took the stand today. Someone else may have taken the stand later this afternoon that I'm not aware of, but they are going to continue tomorrow. And they were hoping, and I think they believe are going to finish tomorrow. It's the only way they can do it. There is no tolling of that 75-day deadline. So they can't say, oh, we're going to move it into Monday. They got to finish tomorrow. So we can expect more testimony tomorrow. Russell Wilson will continue presenting his case to the jury. His case to the new judge. And we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. It was truly interesting stuff today. As saying, whatever's in the dark will eventually come to the light. You had to know this day was coming. Even if you think Bill Worski, the prosecutor, was trying to protect Austin Metcalf and his family from being dragged through the mud for information that may not have ended up at trial, that would have been fair too. But you got to know, eventually all this stuff was going to come out. You can't keep it secret forever. So the most important consideration for everyone, the judge, Bill Worski, the defense, was to make sure Carmelo Anthony got a fair trial. And again, this goes back to the interview that was given by the judge where he said, I wanted to make sure everybody got a fair trial, prosecution and the defense. No, the defendant is the one that's assured of, fair trial. And this is what I'm talking about. Were all the decisions made by prosecutor and the judge concern mostly with making sure Carmelo Anthony got a fair trial, or were there other concerns? We don't know. We don't know. And we may never know. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Truly appreciate it. If you appreciate my work, please make sure you like and subscribe. I will come back tomorrow with more on this case. Um, Report to you what's happening tomorrow. Try to come twice, maybe at the lunch break. Get your shorter video. Later in the day, we'll try to wrap up everything that happened during the day. And again, decisions have to be made by Monday. So things will happen very quickly in this case. Again, Michael Ayala for Legal View. Thank you so much for watching.
This is Legal View, where we look at the news from a legal point of view.